Hello and welcome to Special Olympics Montana's Unified Champions Schools 2017-2018 webinar series. Your webinar series today is December 12th, 2017, and our topic is Inclusive Youth Leadership. Unified Champions Schools offer many benefits to improving school climates. Unified Champion schools can reduce bullying and exclusion. They can promote healthy activity and interactions. They can combat stereotypes and stigma, eliminate hurtful language in schools, and engage young people in pro-social activities that lead to improved behavior and school climate. The Unified Champion Schools approach incorporates Special Olympics sports and related activities while enhancing the youth experience and empowering them to be change agents in their communities. This requires a shift in current programs and paradigms from a focus on events to committing to a movement advocating for youth as leaders. This programming promotes social inclusion in schools to ensure special education and general education students are equitably engaged. Teachers and students are encouraged to collaborate and create supportive classrooms, activities, and opportunities. Unified Champion schools follow a three-component model. The first component is inclusive sports and/or fitness, which creates opportunities that bring students with and without disabilities together to participate in inclusive sports activities. These include Special Olympics Unified Sports, Unified Physical Education, and Special Olympics Young Athletes, just to name a few. The second component of the Unified Champion School is inclusive youth leadership. Opportunities within the Unified Youth Leadership component are for students with and without disabilities to take on leadership roles in promoting Unified Champion Schools program activities or other socially inclusive events in the school and community. Events might include unified or inclusive youth leadership clubs, youth activation committees, youth leadership trainings, and youth summits. And the third component is whole school awareness or engagement. Opportunities within this component are for all students in the school to participate in the Unified Champion Schools program. Some examples would be offering the Get Into It curriculum to classrooms throughout the school, hosting a Spread the Word to End the Word or Respect Rally campaign, hosting youth rallies, forums, or assemblies, participating in Fans in the Stands, facilitating a Unified Sports Day, or participating in any of the numerous Special Olympics Montana fundraisers. The Unified Champions Schools movement is a multifaceted, school-based project that uses sports and education programs to activate young people to develop school communities where all youth are agents of change. There are many tools available for Unified Champions Schools. As you can see in the picture on our screen, that these are some small examples of different tools for each component of a Unified Champion School. So the first, you'll see unified clubs, youth activation committees, and college clubs are all examples of activities of inclusive youth leadership. Unified Physical Education or Unified PE, Unified Sports, and the Young Athletes program are all examples of inclusive sports activities. The Get Into It curriculum, or the R Word campaigns or respect rallies, and Fans in the Stands are examples of whole school engagement activities. Today, we'd like to focus on inclusive youth leadership. As the second component of a Unified Champion School, inclusive youth leadership engages students with and without intellectual disabilities to work together to lead and plan advocacy, awareness, and other Special Olympics and related inclusive activities throughout the school year. There are three main approaches to involving your school in inclusive youth leadership programming as part of being a Unified Champion School. Each of the following approaches should be modified to fit your school's age group and needs: unified clubs, youth activation committees, and inclusive existing clubs. Each one of these initiatives should be used to foster inclusive youth leadership within a school or community and should include youth of all ability levels. Next, we'll go into a little more detail about each approach. A unified club is a non-academic, school-based club that brings students with and without intellectual disabilities together for planning and participating in Special Olympics activities, including unified sports, social and community activities that foster understanding, acceptance, and promote leadership and collaborative skill building. This is a club that teams students with and without disabilities through sports training and competition and/or social and recreational opportunities. Unified clubs often are formed when there is no existing club or group in a school where young people with and without intellectual disability can compete, build friendships, and work on projects together. This section focuses on steps to form a unified club and the ways in which the club can activate its members. Some known benefits of a unified club include creating a new structure at the school that allows more freedom than the current school model. Unified clubs also put emphasis on the friendship aspect of Unified Champion schools, creating a tight bond between students with and without ID. Unified clubs are also valuable in a school that has limited options for other types of inclusive engagement. There are some key steps to starting a unified club. The first step is to determine your school's requirements for starting a club and make sure you follow their processes. This might include contacting an advisor, having interested students sign a petition, or hosting an information session. The second step is to talk to special education and general education teachers at your school. Ask these questions. How many students would be interested in participating? Or are you able to provide assistance? The third step would be to contact your local Special Olympics office and express your interest in forming a unified club. If you do not have a special education program at your school, they can help you identify local athletes who could get involved. The fourth step is to set up the first official meeting with a core group of students, both with and without intellectual disabilities, and the club advisor. And the fifth step is to invite all students at the school to the first official meeting. Their unified clubs can look different in every school. So we'd like to share with you some examples and some activities from our Unified Champion Schools portal website that you can refer to if you're interested in starting a unified club. So on our Unified Champion Schools portal, you'll see a tab here at the top indicating youth leadership. And underneath in this general youth leadership page, it goes over what youth leadership is. It talks about the role of youth leadership in your school, provides some resources for educators, and also talks a little bit about what youth leadership looks like in a Unified Champion School and provides a link to the Youth Leadership Guide. On to unified clubs. So for unified clubs, we see that, again, this is a new school program, a new school club. It's not something that already exists, it's new. And it's often a great fit for elementary and middle school programs. We find a lot of success with unified clubs there. So we just went over those 5 steps to starting a unified club. They're also here on the website, as well as an overview of how to create and sustain a Special Olympics Unified Club in this document here. Some examples of activities that a unified club might do. One would be to go beyond your school and to plan some weekend or after-school field trips or activities. This might include creating a league-type sport, such as bowling, setting up weekly bowling outings or monthly bowling outings with your unified club participants, or possibly meeting in a local park during the early fall or later in the spring to practice different sports. Special Olympics Montana would be very happy to help you with equipment or rules or any other information or materials you might need to get something like this started. Some additional ideas include planning trips to the movies or local museums, creating more social opportunities for inclusive engagement. As you can see in this picture here, we had a few students from Helena attending the Helena Youth Days event, and they traveled to one of the science museums and had a great time learning and exploring together. Also, some other options would be to create a fitness program, such as a walking club or another activity that promotes physical fitness to health to students. And you can also encourage your unified club to participate as fans in the stands at a local or a state Special Olympics competition event. Unified clubs can also serve as a means to educate others. Students in the club can organize an awareness campaign, such as a respect rally, or they can ask students to come and sign the pledge not to use the R word during a lunch hour. They can also host a Spread the Word to End the Word week or a month-long campaign in March. There's also this really exciting play called It's Our School Too. And there's a link to the script here on this page. And this play would be an easy way to engage your unified club in some activities as far as like practicing drama, public speaking, and then they could practice this at their unified club meetings and present it or perform it to the larger student body. You could also start a study or tutor program where students in the unified club come together to study for upcoming tests. Regardless, it's sort of like a study or prep time. We've also heard of buddy reading groups, and it can really just be an opportunity for students to study together, and obviously while grades are improving, friendships among these students start to grow. As we mentioned, an example of something a unified club could do would be participate in Fans in the Stands. They could go and cheer on their own classmates at a school function, albeit a school game or an assembly, or they could go to a local Special Olympics or a state Special Olympics competition and provide some support in the way of cheering. And we mentioned some additional weekend activities. But overall, unified clubs have create an opportunity that does not exist in your school for students with and without disabilities to come together, to become friends, and to start to learn either about unified sports or inclusive sports and how to interact with one another on a more equitable basis. So our next suggestion for inclusive youth leadership is the Youth Activation Committee, or sometimes we commonly refer to this as the YAC. A Youth Activation Committee is a group of youth with and without intellectual disabilities from a school or community that work with the local or state Special Olympics program to develop strategies and organize events to build a school community where all young people are agents of change. They promote leadership in schools by advocating for Special Olympics and the acceptance of all students. The Youth Activation Committee, or YAC, can exist on a national, state, local, community, or school level. We'll take you back to the website now, where you can see information that we have available on Youth Activation Committee. So again, up here at the navigation bar, you'll see unified clubs, quickly followed by youth activation committees. So for youth activation committees, again, there's a process for starting a committee. We do see more success with youth activation committees at the high school level. So please keep that in mind as you're looking to implement any of these activities or approaches at your school. To start a youth activation committee, first you want to determine again if you want to start an official school-based club or if you want this to be a community endeavor. An example of something of a community youth activation committee would be maybe bringing students from multiple high schools together to serve on a district youth activation committee. From there, you would want to identify a teacher or an adult leader to serve as an advisor and meet with local principals or school administration to gain approval before moving forward with your plan. Then we would encourage you to contact, again, the Special Olympics Montana staff to express your interest in starting this school or community YAC and see how you can contribute to both our goals as well as your school goals, that of Unified Champion Schools, and that we can link you up with the proper resources. Here again, we see the need to talk to special education and general education teachers at local schools and asking them how many students with and without intellectual disabilities might be interested in getting involved. There might be teachers out there that have students that they believe would be a great fit for a program like this. So talking to them is one of your best methods of recruitment. And then once you have your core group sort of solidified, you want to start talking about what initiatives the YAC might be interested in most for the year, and then start inviting other leaders or other students to join in on those activities. Different than a unified club, youth activation committees or YACs have more of a program building capacity. So youth activation committees have been really pivotal in developing unified sports programs and other really innovative changes at schools. A youth activation committee could begin to start a unified sports program at their school if one does not exist. They could talk about forming a team, they could gauge interest, and there's great resources. You see here the Unified Sports Research page that talks about how to develop a unified sports team. The Youth Activation Committee could also host what we like to consider a unified sports experience, and this might be a sports skills day. And we've seen some high schools do this more informally, where the soccer team or the basketball team or the track team will come out and do skills trainings with Special Olympics athletes. And this might be something that a youth activation committee could organize. They could even bring in college athletes to work with high school students, and that could be really exciting. You can see here in this picture at the top, this was actually a scrimmage between Capital High School, the Capital High School Bruins girls basketball team and the Capital High Bruins Unified Special Olympics team, maybe about a year ago. And that's a great example of a unified sports experience. It's not competitive, it's not qualifying for anything, but it is an opportunity for students to get to interact and play recreational sports with one another. Youth activation committees can also start to spread the message, or they can host or organize a game. And what that means is that local areas around the state, there's actually 12 areas that serve different geographic borders. Those areas service adult teams, youth teams, but it could be possible for a youth activation committee to petition to host a regional game or a local competition at their school. For example, in Kalispell, Glacier High School hosts the area's annual basketball tournament prior to the state basketball tournament. It's a great event. The school gets really involved, and that's definitely something that we could see other youth activation committees or schools start to do more often. Youth activation committees can host inclusive youth rallies. This might include hosting a rally at the school, or hosting a rally at your county seat or your state capital. You can also you can have a parade. You can be part of a parade, like a homecoming parade or a community parade, anything that raises awareness about what you're doing. And this is a great opportunity for students to be in charge of planning and advertising and executing the event. And remember that this is both students with and without intellectual disabilities. A really easy way for the Youth Activation Committee members to participate in this youth leadership component is Special Olympics Montana and the Montana Behavioral Initiative have been partnering for several years to host 4 to 5 Youth Days conferences across the state every fall. And you could easily, if you have Youth Activation Committee members, you could team up with your MBI team and potentially attend those Youth Days events together, making it a more inclusive opportunity. Youth activation committees can also plan youth summits, and this might look like, as I mentioned, if you have a youth activation committee that's more community-based than school-based, and it spans maybe 3 different high schools in your school district, the Youth Activation Committee could potentially host a youth summit where students from all, whether maybe middle schools or the high school, are invited to participate in a one-day conference type event. And they can learn about inclusion, they can work with students with and without intellectual disabilities, and there's all sorts of great resources and information about planning a youth summit if that's something you might be interested in doing. Youth activation committees have also been very successful organizing and participating in Special Olympics fundraisers. We've had youth activation committees participate in polar plunges. They've sold raffle tickets between November and May each year. And they've also gone as far as to host unique fundraisers, such as hat days, superhero walks, craft sales. We even had a school here in Missoula organize and facilitate a 5K fundraiser. Youth activation committees can also encourage teachers to participate in the Get Into It lesson, the Get Into It classroom curriculum. Get Into It is sort of they're established lesson plans for different grades, as you can see listed here. We have lesson plans from K through 12 grades, and you can easily ask Youth Activation Committee members to talk to their teachers or talk to classrooms or talk to elementary schools about promoting the Get Into It curriculum for a certain part of the year. The last part of the Youth Activation Committee is really, it pertains to our Special Olympics Montana's State Youth Activation Committee. So although you can have these school-based or community-based youth activation committees, there's also the State Youth Activation Committee. Students with and without intellectual disabilities are accepted into the State Youth Activation Committee on an application basis. Applications are open in the spring, and student participation is announced during the summer. State YAC members participate in a fall launch event, which is usually a 2-day conference, and they also participate in monthly calls. They help to organize and facilitate the Special Olympics session at the MBI Youth Days and are encouraged to participate in at least one of the youth days in their local communities. They also assist with the State Winter Games planning. They organize the parade of athletes at the State Winter Games. And then State Youth Activation Committee members are also asked to set their own goals and take information back to their local school or their community to try and promote Unified Champions schools, as well as inclusive youth leadership opportunities. So one of the questions we get asked most often is, how do we recruit members into youth leadership or unified clubs or unified sports? And there are a lot of really creative ways to get students engaged. A great example would be to create a really simple sign like this one you see in the photo. It's a marker and a poster board, and this could easily be created by teachers or students. You could get even more creative and add pictures and paintings and artwork and things like that. And there's also the opportunity you could host an inclusive open gym where you work with Special Olympics staff to get equipment or learn rules for different games, and then students could come into an open gym session and start participating in these different events, and it would be open to students with and without disabilities. This might be a great way to recruit some students into your youth leadership programs. You can also talk to student groups about becoming partners and inclusion in general. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. But again, here talking to special education teachers and students about your plans for youth leadership activities and how they might be able to get involved. Some things to remember about recruiting members into your youth activation committee would be that any student can be a member of the youth activation committee. And you really want to look for students that stand out amongst their peers. And by peers, we mean students who are positive, energetic, engaging, responsible, and sincere. You could look to other clubs like Student Council, the National Honor Society, Key Club, other programs like that to see if there's anyone interested in joining your youth activation committee. And then again, consulting with your special education teachers and director. As you saw on the Unified Champions School portal website, the Youth Activation Committee, there's a Special Olympics has created a Youth Activation Committee toolkit. So this toolkit has all the resources you need to get your YAC started and engaged. So never fear, the toolkit is here. So our third approach to inclusive youth leadership is developing an inclusive existing club, or sometimes transforming an existing club to be inclusive. In many schools, clubs already exist that focus on leadership, community service, and improving the school environment. For these schools, an existing school club can develop into an inclusive club by including youth with and without intellectual disabilities. For steps on how to turn your existing club into an inclusive one, you can look at the Youth Leadership Guide found in the UCS UCS Youth Leadership Portal webpage. And again, going back to our portal website here, under inclusive clubs, you'll see some more information about how to get this started. So if you have a club at your school or several clubs, like a leadership team or an MBI team or a student council, it might be in your best interest to try and transition or transform that existing club into one that's inclusive. So the first step to exploring this approach would be to identify clubs that are currently working towards acceptance and understanding for all students. Then connect with advisors, officers, and members of these clubs to better understand their current work. Ask them questions like, do you have a club mission? What type of work is your club currently doing? Do you have any students with disabilities that are part of this club? And if they say no, you should ask, well, why not? Make sure you speak with these club leaders about the value of inclusive youth leadership and how it aligns and enhances their goals. So you want to make sure that once you know all of the schools that might be currently working towards acceptance and understanding for all students, you want to make sure that the goals of a unified champion school and inclusive youth leadership are similar to or well aligned with the goals of that club. From there, you'd want to visit inclusive and special education classrooms to identify students that might be interested in being part of these clubs. It might be as simple as hanging posters, but it also would be asking teachers to ask their students if they were interested. So if you communicate with your special education teachers and they know that these opportunities, that student council is now inclusive, maybe they could make this announcement to their students, and those students would be able to express interest. There's some great information on this link here about recruiting some diverse youth leaders in case you're struggling with that piece. And then once students have joined, make sure that you're providing them the resources to better understand how they will work together. This might include, if you have an inclusive student council, that your existing student council understands and creates some positions and roles for those students with intellectual disabilities that are clearly outlined so that everybody knows how to work together and what everyone's responsible for and how they can help one another. Some inclusive club activities and examples. We talked a little bit about starting your club, but you could plan an introductory meeting where during that introductory meeting, if it's an inclusive student council or an inclusive key club, then your members start to introduce themselves and they discuss their interests. And it's a great way for students to really get to know each other. Your club, you could also ask the principal if a group of students or a pair of students from your now inclusive club could speak in an assembly about building a more inclusive school environment. It's a great way for students to see how it's working. Sometimes just talking about it isn't enough. Seeing it is believing it. Other activities for inclusive clubs are getting the word out and advertising. An inclusive club could work together to come up with a fun slogan or eye-catching picture or something to get people interested in what the work of the club is doing, as well as recruiting new members. You could host an orientation meeting for interested students. And you could also get teachers involved, again, by asking them to include information about your new inclusive club in their announcements. Some other opportunities would be for an inclusive club to create something like a mix-it-up day on campus, where students are randomly assigned to sit at different tables for lunch. And it's an opportunity for students to start conversations and talk with new people. It would also be an opportunity to invite club leaders from all the clubs in your school to have sort of a discussion about which clubs, like what inclusion is and which clubs might be interested in becoming inclusive. And there's this great example, Special Olympics Unified Champion Schools movement and the National Association of Student Councils have this great resource here where you can see that the opportunities or initiatives with the Unified Champion Schools closely align with those of the Global Citizen Projects, which is part of that National Association of Student Councils. So this is a great example of how, if you have an existing club, you can look at their goals or objectives and see if the Unified Champion Schools goals and objectives also fit or align closely with what they're trying to do. Could be a win-win for everyone. So in addition to these three models these three approaches to inclusion, we want to give you some additional ideas on how to get your groups started. Some really simple ideas to throw out there are that October is National Bullying and Prevention Month. So that's a great month or a great focus for a youth activation committee or a unified club if you're doing any type of awareness campaign. March is the National Intellectual Disability or Developmental Disability Awareness Month. It's also the official Spread the Word to End the Word month. So a lot of our respect rallies and Spread the Word to End the Word campaigns take place during the month of March. And don't forget to utilize social media to share stories about what inclusion looks like at your school. We have several high school youth activation committees who have Facebook groups, and they post information about their activities, and they share that with other students in the school to recruit and to share what they're doing. This is a great method for promoting inclusion and also for keeping Special Olympics Montana in the loop so we can share your great stories. And I did mention earlier the Get Into It curriculum, as you saw in the Unified Champion Schools portal, but Special Olympics Get Into It consists of online resources that include lessons, activities, videos, athlete stories, and supplemental materials. At the core of Get Into It are age-appropriate lessons designed to be taught in the context of class periods. Activities with ties to service learning are completed in a classroom or community setting as part of a club, and after-school activity or community-based event, and include involvement with Special Olympics programs whenever possible. As you can see on this page, there's opportunities for you log out, you click on any of those links that I shared with you, and you can log in as an educator or a student and have access to the Get Into It materials. So the next piece is we want to share a little bit about how inclusive youth leadership might look in different schools, elementary, middle school, and high school. And you'll see here that there's some ideas. In an elementary school, you might have a young athletes program, or you might have a developing Special Olympics team. And it might be unified, or you might have a unified club. And either way, if you're engaging in some type of physical fitness or activity, you could incorporate youth leadership by having students lead, warm up, and cool downs for physical fitness exercise. They could take turns leading a group in a certain exercise. They could, for young athletes, children could take turns being the leader in the follow the leader activity. For a larger group, you could have students set up an obstacle course or decide the order of events or the order of training or the sport that you play that day. And it's also important to use some classroom time to discuss the important topics like respect that help children become better members of their classroom or community. These are all examples of how you can engage in youth leadership at your elementary school. An example would be preschool students with learning disabilities at Liberty Elementary School learned and taught yoga to their fellow students. They became leaders in the classroom and helped other students learn to work together. While gaining skills that would help them overcome personal difficulties, all students gained an understanding of how to work together, helping each other become successful. This inclusive opportunity provided a welcoming environment for students of all abilities. Students with and without intellectual disabilities, as well as students with significant physical challenges, learned movements that increased their awareness of self, enhanced muscle control, and gained flexibility. Through these shared experiences with yoga, the overall classroom became a more collaborative environment with sharing and teamwork. Every child in the class scored proficient or higher in these areas, and the class became a nurturing environment for all. In middle schools, we see great success with youth leadership activities such as unified clubs. Unified clubs in a middle school are a great way to get students engaged or excited about unified sports or about Special Olympics in general. And you can adjust the unified club to be age appropriate or meet the needs of your students and your school. An example here is Mary Middle School, of course a fake name, took the lead in helping their peers learn about what it means to be an inclusive school. Through a new school club, students implemented a variety of activities aimed at raising awareness of equity and respect. The effort began when a group of general education students started sitting with students with disabilities at lunch. Together, they decided to start a unified club, where students with and without disabilities meet once a week, eat lunch, play outdoor games, practice sports, or engage in a variety of activities, like arts and crafts, cooking, or table games. The need for this effort was identified and subsequently led by youth as a way of engaging all students in shared experiences. The success of these efforts led to an agreement to conduct a unified sports program throughout the entire district. So again, you can see that even in a middle school with a unified club, we are seeing that even a small club of just a few students is creating sort of a snowball effect and having greater impact on the larger community. For high schools, youth leadership, kind of the sky's the limit. There are lots of examples of how high schools might be able to engage in youth leadership. Again, unified clubs, youth activation committees, and transforming existing clubs into inclusive clubs. All three of those are easily applicable in a high school. Some examples of activities in high schools that reflect youth leadership activities: the National Honor Society, which includes an inclusive National Honor Society, which includes students with and without disabilities, could host a series of assemblies once a month to increase awareness of social inclusion and foster respect among all students. A junior prom committee could seek nominations for diverse students to be on the prom court and engage students with and without intellectual disabilities in planning and decorating for the prom. The Unified Club could work with the school leadership committee, like an MBI team, to incorporate social inclusion as part of the school-wide expectations for student behavior. And providing opportunities for youth does not have to be limited to the classroom. Students in Unified Champion schools are encouraged to connect with Special Olympics Montana staff to learn about other opportunities, including shadowing the Special Olympics Games management team, joining the board of directors, serving on a local area management team, or even applying for an internship in the future. There's lots of ways to get involved with Special Olympics Montana, and inclusive youth leadership can take on many forms. So Special Olympics North America has been partnering with the Center for Social Development and Education with the University of Massachusetts in Boston for the past 10 years to conduct research and through surveys and interviews with schools and students participating in Unified Champion School activities to learn sort of what the effect on students might be. And research has found that inclusive youth leadership helps to promote positive attitudes towards classroom inclusion by making students more aware of the students with disabilities. Research also has found that inclusive youth leadership creates opportunities for social interactions between students with and without disabilities, which lead to students reporting that they would feel more comfortable carrying on a conversation with a student with ID at the school, or sitting with a student with ID at lunch, and working on a school project with a student with ID. Included in this research, we found that inclusive youth leadership clubs bring together students from across the school community year after year. So similar to other high school extracurricular activities, inclusive youth leadership clubs sustain student involvement across multiple years and grades. We have seen from this research that there's a great impact on student interactions. We've seen that more than 3/4 of students surveyed said that they got to know a student who got to know a student with intellectual disability considered them to be a friend. We know that inclusive youth leadership and the Unified Champions Schools movement also has an impact on students' personal growth. Students have learned about helping others, how they affect others, and how to stand up for what is right. We've also seen that inclusive youth leadership has a great impact on school climate, noting that 93% of teachers believe that Unified Champion Schools has created a more socially inclusive environment, and 88% credit the program with reducing bullying and teasing in their school. We also know that 94% of those surveyed said that they have increased opportunities to work together, and 82% of students felt that they were able to change their school for the better. SOMT hopes that all Unified Champion Schools will embrace the inclusive youth leadership component and work to create a fun, engaging, and welcoming climate for leaders of all abilities at their school. We hope that you continue to join us as we choose inclusion, and we hope that you have a lot of fun with your youth leadership activities. Thank you so much for participating. Our next webinar is Tuesday, January 9th, 2018 from 4 to 5 p.m. And the topic will be Respect Rallies and R-Word campaigns. For more information, visit somt.org/unified strategy or contact your Special Olympics Montana office. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the new year.